Hello and welcome to KeyForge Coffee Break. Cameron Weaver hanging out with you. Welcome back if you have been watching my series of getting into KeyForge. This is a short run series where we're going to be taking a look at, in the first video, the rules of the game, how the game plays, and what cards do. The latest video is a look at the first set of KeyForge Call of the Archons and what each of those 7 houses do. And today's video is about set number 2, Age of Ascension. So here we are on Archon Arcana, a fantastic fan-made website, and they've got some great resources for KeyForge players, new and veteran alike. So right here, if you navigate to the sets section, you can see all the different sets. And Age of Ascension was the second KeyForge set that was made and released by FFG. It was the follow-up to a very just groundbreaking game that was KeyForge. Now, Age of Ascension, in retrospect, has some issues, right? As do a lot of, second things in a really big franchise, or even a small franchise, I guess, like KeyForge. But you've heard of the term sophomore slump. That's kind of what Age of Ascension is. I say that, but I also love Age of Ascension so much. It's one of my favorite KeyForge sets to just play sealed. And it's probably the set that I have the most decks of for a number of reasons that I'll get to later on in the video. But Age of Ascension is the second KeyForge set announced in an FFG live stream with Richard Garfield on February 12, 2019, and released later on May 30th, 2019. So this is the first time we're seeing new cards come in, and we're seeing some old cards stay in, and no new houses were introduced yet. I feel like FFG just kind of felt like, hey, we've got 7 houses. Let's let them breathe. Let's let their identities be known. Let's flesh this out a little bit, and let's try a little bit of something new. So a new mechanic was introduced on the Age of Ascension cards. New keywords, Alpha, Omega, and Deploy were introduced in this one. So cards with the Alpha keyword means they have to be the first card you play out of your hand. So, for example, if I have a Brobnar card that has Alpha on it, and I call Brobnar, the only way for me to legally use that card is to play it first. Omega is the other side of that. If a card has Omega, it has to be the last card you play, because Omega ends your turn. So some really powerful cards in Call of the Archons were redesigned and rebalanced with Alpha or Omega in mind. Deploy was a really cool keyword that has stuck around. When you're playing creatures down in KeyForge, you play them to either your left or right flank at any given time. Deploy lets you put that creature with Deploy anywhere into your battle line. So that's a really good thing to be able to do, especially with some play effects that deal with neighboring creatures, which we'll get into later. Age of Ascension also introduced the concept of legacy cards. So in KeyForge, no matter what set you're getting now outside of Call of the Archons, you have a chance for the algorithm to put what's called a legacy card into your deck. A legacy card is a card from a previous set or multiple previous sets ago that shows up in your current deck, either in the house that it belongs to or as a Maverick, which is something I didn't touch on in the first video, but Mavericks are very rare cards that appear from the same card pool as that set, but in a different house. So, for example, I might have Gengar Chieftain show up in Shadows in Call of the Archons or in Age of Ascension. So that's the concept of a Maverick. It just continues to further boost that idea of every deck is unique. And if you get a Maverick, like, that is a very rare thing. And the odds of someone else getting the exact same Maverick in the exact same house is very low. But Legacy is that also very big mathy concept of any card can really show up in any deck, just depending on how the algorithm does it. So Age of Ascension I think the main problem with it, we'll start with the cons of this set before we get into the houses and all the pros. I want to get the negative stuff out of the way. Call of the Archons is such a fast set. We talked about how quickly combos happen. You know, how the decks kind of feel like they're playing themselves. You're playing a lot of actions. You're seeing a little bit of creatures, but all the creatures have really good effects. There's a lot of Ember Pips printed on the cards in Call of the Archons. It just feels like a very fast set. When Age of Ascension came out, that slowed down. There was a bigger emphasis on board control and board state, less board wiping, less really flashy cards, less big swingy cards, as Call of the Archons was, want to have. Also, decks with more creature count than actions and artifacts, which will naturally slow down your hand crafting and moving through your deck and efficiency in most decks. Again, you can't really... There's not a metric here because you're not building the decks yourselves. You're getting them delivered to you. So, at the time of Age of Ascension's release, it was generally considered just a worse set than Call of the Archons. It was cool to see new cards in the 7 houses that we already knew, but some of them are really, really limited by their alpha or omega keywords, and a lot of Age of Ascension decks don't hold up competitively. That being said, the deck that sold for $3,600 on eBay was an Age of Ascension deck, and that was very recent, and it has won the high-level tournaments of KeyForge Organized Play. It has won multiple Vault Tours, and that's an Age of Ascension deck. So, retrospectively, especially during the pandemic, when KeyForge was kind of teetering on death, Age of Ascension was the first set to drop in value. My wife and I were buying display cases of Age of Ascension for $30 at first, then down to $20, and then I think the lowest we ever got a box was $12. So that's $1 a deck. So that is where, if you look around and if you watch some old videos, and if you, even depending on who you're talking to about KeyForge, if you bring up Age of Ascension, you're going to get mixed reviews. I would like to think that now, as the dust has settled and we are 6 sets in, that the hardcore KeyForge players respect Age of Ascension a lot more. It's like mining for gold with Age of Ascension. You're not going to get the most fire decks, but every now and then you find that diamond that is better than anything you've ever seen in any other set. And since it's cheap, it's fun to look. It's fun to search. It's fun to sift through the dirt and look for that gold. But also, I would say that Age of Ascension sealed against another Age of Ascension deck is some of the most fun I've ever had playing KeyForge, because the games are a little slower. It feels more like a chess match. Age of Ascension is the chess of KeyForge. There's a lot more decision space. It's a lot more exciting because the games feel a lot closer. Even 2 really dud decks from Age of Ascension, if you ram them against each other, it feels like an epic game. So, with that being said, I think I've mentioned it in one of my other videos. Age of Ascension is a perfect jumping in point for KeyForge. It still has the same 7 houses as the first set. It's a little more complicated in the fact that, like, you have to follow the alpha and omega rules, and deploy. Kind of, throws the teaching part of it where you're just playing cards left or right. But I swear to you, Age of Ascension, I think, especially if you're trying to get a friend into it, you guys split a case on Amazon. That's $20. You're each paying $10 to get in the game, which you normally would. One deck is $10. If you buy a display for $20, you and your friend who both put $10 in get 6 decks, and for the price of 1. So there's that. I think the games are really fun and dynamic. And just some of my favorite cards actually were printed in Age of Ascension first and then reprinted. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Age of Ascension and this is right off the heels of our Call the Archons video. So I'm not going to go as in-depth with every house because they do the same things, just a little differently here. So I'm going to pull up the card list for Age of Ascension right here on Archon Arcana. We love this. Card gallery. Okay. Age of Ascension. Boom. Let's do it. So starting with Brobnar, we're going to see some familiar faces in Brobnar, but then we're going to see some really cool new stuff. So returning cards like Gengar Chieftain are still just good. This is a common 5-power creature with a great play effect. You may ready and fight with a neighboring creature. They lean really heavy into that with cards like Foozle. Reap. If an enemy creature has been destroyed this turn, gain 1 Ember. So you use Gengar Chieftain, ready and fight with something else. If Foozle's standing, Foozle's going to reap for 1 Ember and then get an additional Ember as long as you've destroyed an enemy creature. And that doesn't have to be just by a fight. Foozle can also get that ability if a card like, say, Flamewake Shaman, play deal 2 damage to a creature, pops a small creature. Foozle can then reap and get that extra Ember. Flamewake Shaman is very red, you know, like from other games. It's that direct damage kind of thing. Age of Ascension did that pretty well. We also see cards like Grok that reward you for fighting. After fight, if Grok stays alive, your opponent loses 1 Ember. That's great. Gauntlet of Command returns as a common artifact. Action, ready, and fight with a friendly creature. So that's giving a little bit of the house cheating aspect that we love to see in any KeyForge deck. And Bramo is really, really good. So this is another common Brobnar creature, 4 power, 1 armor. Play, deal 2 damage to each enemy flank creature. So the 2 creatures on the left and the right most part of your opponent's battle line are taking 2 damage. This is really fun for early games where, say, your opponent put a big guy on taunt and flanked it with 2 little guys on the left and the right. Those 2 little guys can't be hit in a fight, but Bramo just throws trees at them. And that's really cool. One more thing I'd love to talk about for Brobnar. Well, 2 more things. Grunt Buggy. This is an uncommon, but this is a very powerful card in this set, and we only see it in Age of Ascension. This is an artifact. You get a Pip of Ember for playing it. And this is really, outside of Lash of Broken Dreams, this card popped up and kind of gave everybody like, whoa, this is a new part of the game. This is a very good thing that they implemented, and that's key cost manipulation, and in a fair way. So Grunt Buggy is a vehicle artifact that is just always on as soon as it comes in. It has a passive ability that says your opponent's keys cost +1 for each friendly creature with power 5 or higher, but your keys also cost +1 for each enemy creature with power 5 or higher. So on paper, it's a very symmetrical artifact, right? But you got to think, Grunt Buggy showing up in Brobnar means that you're probably equipped with a lot of creatures that hit that criteria. Your opponent might not. In matchups where your opponent is not running Brobnar, or in future sets, not running houses like Saurian Sanctum in Brobnar, Grunt Buggy might go off better for you, especially if you have some really good board control and board presence, and if your opponent doesn't have a lot of board wiping, Grunt Buggy can really affect the game. And with an Ember Pip just for putting it down, it's tempting. But I feel like this is also a really cool skill testing card because you kind of have to know what your opponent is going to be playing. If you throw Grunt Buggy down just for the Ember, but your opponent is running a deck with a ton of high power creatures, it might end up that your keys are costing way more at any given time than your opponent's. But those decisions in that decision space is what I love about KeyForge. So Grunt Buggy, really fun artifact, and Brobnar got a key cheat in Age of Ascension. One of my favorite key cheats, this is called Might Makes Right. So when you play it, you get a Pip of Ember. This is a rare card, by the way. Play, you may sacrifice any number of creatures with total power of 25 or more. If you do, forge a key at no cost. Seems daunting, seems pretty hard, but you get to keep all the Ember. So in a perfect world, you have a board full of really powerful Brobnar creatures, right? Start of your turn, you just reap out with them. You get into check. Pop down Might Makes Right. Sacrifice creatures equaling 25 or more power. You get a key, and you're in check for the next one. Very good. But where are you going to get all that power? Well, Wallop the Titanic is a common creature. 11 power. Common means you're probably going to see a couple copies of this card. So popping down 2 Lollop the Titanics gets you up to 22 already. Odds are you're going to have 3 more power on the board, or if not, just drop any other Brobnar creature there. Play Might Makes Right. Get your key. Might Makes Right is a very fun card to look for. And again, because there's no interaction during your turn from your opponent, there's not a lot they can do about that. They've got to keep your board whittled down. Finally, there are... Okay, so as far as the chase cards in this set, every house has a shard, and shards work together. So if you have a shard in your deck, I think the algorithm guarantees you that you get at least one more, but you could potentially have 3 shards throughout your deck, 1 for each house. So we'll go over each shard as we talk about each house, but they kind of play into the archetype of that house, which I'm bringing these up, one, because it's neat that the algorithm puts shards together. They're rare, and they will help me explain to you what each house does in this set. So we talked about Brobnar likes to fight. You want to be rewarded for your fights. Shard of Strength says action. Give a friendly creature a +1 power counter for each friendly shard. So that includes itself. So if you only have Shard of Strength out and you're playing Brobnar and you just need to buff up your guy a little bit more, or get it from a 4 cost to a 5 cost to help your Grunt Buggy, Shard of Strength is there for you. It's good. Forged from Joy, the Shard of Strength. One bad thing about Brobnar I'd like to bring up. This is a very infamous topic. Well, 2. I'll do 2. Groggins is an 8-power giant creature. When Groggins is used to fight, it can only attack flank creatures. We only see Groggins printed in AOA. And Groggins is, at his core, just worse Troll from Call of the Archons. Troll is an 8-power Brobnar creature that says Reap, heal 3 damage from Troll. There's no restrictions. It's the same power level, but Troll can potentially heal itself. Where Groggins has that 8 power, but is limited to where he can attack. We're going to see this trend in Worlds Collide, the 3rd set, and we'll talk about that. But don't worry. If you're already a big fan of Brobnar, I've got exciting news. No spoilers, but Winds of Exchange Brobnar is probably the perfect form of that house. So if you're watching these first 2 videos, before Winds of Exchange video even comes out or you even get to it, just know that that set, if you're looking for the best Brobnar, that's the one. So Groggins is a bit of a bummer, a bit of a weird neutering there. The other one I want to talk about is Gargantus Scrapper. This is a 3-cost giant creature, or 3 power. Sorry, I'm used to Battle Spirits. And it has the alpha keyword. So that means you can only play this card before doing anything else that step. Play, if you have 3 Ember or more, deal 3 damage to an enemy creature. That can be helpful, but it would just be better if there was no alpha here. Because if you had Brobnar creatures on the board to reap and get you into that 3, or play a couple actions first to get you that 3, this would be a lot more consistent. It just felt like there was a restriction on this card to be good for no reason. Luckily, it's only an uncommon, but it feels like you're only seeing this card at the uncommon spot if you're opening a lot of decks. And every now and then, Gargantua Scrapper goes off. But like cards like Flamewake Shaman that we looked at earlier, 4 power, play, deal 2 damage to any enemy creature, no restrictions, and it's not an alpha. So cards like this just kind of make you scratch your head. They're like, I don't understand where the design space was for that card. But yeah, as a quick recap, Brobnar still wants to fight. Brobnar is throwing some more damage around, and they get a key cheat, and they reward you for powering up your guys. So Brobnar is just very, very fun, despite some of the weird setbacks. You're still feeling good when you see Brobnar in your house lineup. So now moving on to Dis, everybody's favorite. Dis definitely got retuned a little bit. I think they got pulled back in some areas that they were just too good at in Call the Archons. But they also got some more cool support. Like, Anguish is a very cool card. It's at uncommon. The art is amazing. But Dis is giving you more ways to increase your opponent's key costs as well. And as we talked about Grunt Buggy, now you're seeing more cards like this that also increase key costs. You can start to see that that's kind of a theme through Age of Ascension, and we start to see that grow and evolve over the course of the game. Anguish is a great example of that. For each damage on Anguish, your opponent's keys cost +1. So either your opponent has to throw multiple things into Anguish to kill it, because 6 is a good number in KeyForge, or on your turn, before your opponent is going to forge, you can throw Anguish into anything 5 or lower, a healthy Anguish, and you can add that much damage to your opponent's key cost that they can't really interact with, and you might be able to keep them off of a key for a minute. We did see Anguish come back in set 4, and I think it's just a really good uncommon card. We get some new imps in this set that are not as good as Dust Imp and Ember Imp. Dust Imp returns, so that's good. But Aember Imp is a 2-power elusive disc creature that says, after a creature reaps, stun it. So that is any creature, yours and your opponent's. So threatening some stun, if you're just playing more cards out of your hand than using cards on the field, Aember Imp is pretty good to slow your opponent down who might be relying on a reap-heavy strategy. Bloodshard Imp also in that same boat. Bloodshard Imp does not get the elusive, but it has a very powerful passive ability. After a creature reaps, its controller must sacrifice it. So what you're going to see about Dis is that they like to destroy their own things. Destroyed triggers on Dis cards are typically better than any other house. Like Dust Imp, we saw him in Call the Archons. We're seeing him again in Age of Ascension. When it is destroyed, you get 2 Ember. So if you have Dust Imp and the Bloodshard Imp on the field at the same time, when Dust Imp reaps, you get the Ember for reaping. You sacrifice Dust Imp, you get 2 more Ember. Very, very fun. Charette returns for good capture, play capture 3. And probably one of the best action cards in the game gets printed here. Exhume. You get an Ember for playing it. You choose a creature in your discard pile, and you play it as if it belonged to the active house and was in your hand. So basically, it's Monster Reborn. You can pick any creature out of your discard pile, slap it back on the board. And that does mean if it has a play effect, like Charette, you get to resolve that play effect immediately. So Exhume is very, very good. Exhume also house cheats. You don't have to revive a disc creature. You can bring any creature from your discard pile back onto the field. We see cards return like Hysteria. Really good disruption here. Play, return each creature to its owner's hand. You have to be a little careful about that if your opponent has good play effects, which we see a lot of good play effects come into the fold in Worlds Collide, which this is reprinted in. But a well-timed Hysteria can totally throw off your opponent's tempo. And if you bounce creatures back to your opponent's hand, if they had Ember on them, that Ember goes to you. Captured Ember returns to the enemy player when that creature capturing it is removed from play in any way. So it doesn't have to just be destroyed. You can pop that creature back to your opponent's hand and get all that Ember on it. So Hysteria, very good card. Back to the destroy kind of thing, Hecatomb is a really neat card that we didn't look at in Call the Archons because it is rare. But it's reprinted here in Age of Ascension. Play, destroy each Dis creature, yours and your opponent's. Each player gains 1 Ember for each creature they control that was destroyed this way. So another good skill testing card. There are scenarios where this obviously swings more in your favor. But if you're playing a mirror match where your opponent also has Dis, you got to time this right, because there are some nasty destroy triggers that are going to go off. Pit Lord returns. Poltergeist, which is really good artifact control, returns here. Use an artifact controlled by any player as if it were yours. That means you can cheat and use one of your own artifacts that belongs to a different house. But at the end of that use, you have to destroy that artifact. And then the Dis artifact shard is the Shard of Pain. So action, deal 1 damage to an enemy creature for each friendly shard. Dis likes to disrupt, deal damage, and it's not the most powerful shard, but it can always get rid of that pesky little creature on your opponent's side, or just do just enough to finish that. There's a train going by. And then another card I'd like to talk about before we move on is Restringuntus, which was also in Call the Archons, but we didn't talk about it. This is a very powerful card. Play, choose a house. Your opponent cannot choose that house as their active house until Restringuntus leaves play. So for you hardcore card gamers out there, yes, this card can lock your opponent out of doing anything, and it can win the game. You have to be very, very careful. If you look at your opponent's list and you see a Restringuntus, handcrafting is important in this game, but you could lock yourself out of the game. Restringuntus is only a 1-power creature. It doesn't have elusive, but it can still be hidden behind a big taunt like a Pit Lord or anything in Sanctum that has taunt, and direct damage is going to be your best way. So Shard of Pain, dealing 1 damage if it's the only shard on the board, could still kill a Restringuntus. But, and especially in the early game, if you're showing a lot of the same house and your opponent has a Restringuntus, they might find a way to lock you out of it. The reason they never printed Restringuntus again is because they also have another house forcing card, not Silver Key Imp. Where'd Tesmal go? These are in alphabetical order, right? There he is. Tesmal is a 2-power imp creature with elusive that says Reap, choose a house. Your opponent cannot choose that house as their active house on their next turn. So Control the Weak was a card I showed you in Call of the Archons. That's not in here. Tesmal is the new Control the Weak for Age of Ascension. So after you Reap with Tesmal, you then tell your opponent what house they can't choose. It's a lot less powerful than Control the Weak, obviously. But if you have 2 Tesmals, because they are printed at common, and you Reap with both of them, and you select 2 different houses with each Tesmal, then your opponent has to choose the 1 house that's left over. So it's a lot more involved of a combo. But if you listen to Call of Discovery or KPR, KeyForge Public Radio, Zach Armstrong, incredible KeyForge player, great podcaster, and very just healthy and positive person for the community. He loves Tesmal, and he loves Rocket Boots Tesmal deck specifically, getting that double Reap and choosing your opponent's house. So if you ever pop one of these open, just think about, what would Zach do? What would Zach do with that situation? Tesmal can go a really long way, and it can be very powerful. The last thing I want to talk about in Dis is Unlocked Gateway. So this is not Gateway to Dis. This is different. This is an Omega card. That means this has to be the last card you play on your turn. Play, destroy each creature. So what this means is, effectively, it is Gateway to Dis. It is a total board wipe. However, you don't get chains for playing it. That's pretty good. But on the other side of that coin is, it is an Omega. After you play it, you're done. So you don't have the opportunity to rebuild a board or play any more cards out of your hand. You have to do everything you want to do beforehand, where Gateway to Dis, you can do it any time. So it's a give or take, it's a balance. And there's some weird rulings with that, like a card called Wild Wormhole, which we might have talked about because it's just fun. Play the top card of your deck. So say you're in Logos, say you're starting your turn, you play Wild Wormhole. You flip into your Unlock Gateway, you destroy everything, and you end your turn. That was it. That's it. So that is, one, the risk of running Wild Wormhole, but two, a reason that you really have to know your deck and know the 36 cards in your deck and know what's left in your deck and know what's possible with your deck. So Unlock Gateway is still a good card. But I would argue it's not as good as Gateway to Dis. So once again, Dis is very disruptive. They like to destroy. They like to limit what your opponent can do. And they do a good job at that. So always good to see Dis. Moving on to Logos, a lot of it is the same. But they get even trickier. So there's a ton of archiving in Age of Ascension Logos. They really lean heavily into that. And then we also have the return of a very powerful rare card called Dysania. This is another skill check card. On play, your opponent discards each of their archived cards. That's huge. You gained 1 Ember for each card discarded this way. 4 power. So obviously Dysania is not going to get huge value in every matchup. But in the matchups where Dysania really works is that mirror match, or, you know, when you're playing against pretty much any Logos deck. You've got to be really careful if your opponent has a Dysania and you're running Logos and you're archiving a bunch of cards. They're not safe anymore. Dysania being alive in this game means that your archives are no longer safe. So you got to be really careful about that. We see the ZYX cards come into the Logos fold. So this is one of them. Director of ZYX is a 3-power elusive Logos creature that says at the start of your turn, archive the top card of your deck. So what that means is, very start of your turn, before you forge a key, before you draw, or, well, you don't draw at the start of your turn, sorry. Before you forge a key, before you choose your house, at the start of your turn effects trigger. Therefore, if Director of ZYX is on your field, you archive the top card of your deck very first thing. Then you check to see if you can forge a key. Then, as you call your house, you could pick up that archived card. Because after you call your house, you can pick up your entire archives. So Director of ZYX either gets to put a card away for you, or add one to the start of your hand for that turn if you call the house of the card that you archived. So very useful tool there. A little sticky too with that elusive ability. The common ZYX is ZYX Researcher. This is a great card. Comes in at common. You're going to see multiple copies of it. 2 power. Play. Archive the top card of your deck or the top card of your discard pile. In KeyForge, your discard pile can't be manipulated. However, it is public information. So when cards leave play, they go on top of the discard pile in the order that they are removed from the field. If massive amounts of cards are destroyed at the same time, I'm relatively certain that you just choose the order in which they enter your discard pile. And that is important for cards like ZYX Researcher, but it's only printed in AOA, right? Well, set 7 of KeyForge deals a lot with the discard pile, and we're going to see a lot more effects like this. So it's good practice right now to get in the habit of intentionally putting your cards into your discard pile the way that you want them to go. Because whatever's on top, you're going to be manipulating and dealing with. So ZYX Research is really good because you can play a really powerful Logos card, then like an action card, or if you had a creature out on the field that you wanted to fight something but then it dies, you could play ZYX Researcher and archive that card. Or if on your last turn you ended by playing a pretty good Omega card in another house, or just any card in another house, and you want to see that card again, boom, first thing you do on your next turn is play ZYX Researcher. There's a lot of versatility here. Also, just archiving the top card of your deck is good. It's really good. Anytime that you can move through the deck faster, you're going to want to do that. And speaking of moving through the deck faster, let's take a look at probably my favorite Logos card from this set, Professor Sutterkin. Professor Sutterkin is a 2-power Logos creature that says, after Reap, draw a card for each friendly Logos creature. So at the very least, Sutterkin sees itself, draws a card after Reap. This is the first Age of Ascension deck I opened. You, Hellstrom, the Mountaintop Musician. There are 4 Professor Sutterkins in it, and 4 other Logos creatures. That means, I guess just 3. No, Phila. Yeah, there are 4 other Logos creatures. So in a perfect world, and I've done this before, if I have all 8 of my Logos creatures out, let's say they're all ready, in some magical world where my opponent let this happen. First Professor Sutterkin reaps. I gain an Ember. I draw 8 cards. Second Professor Sutterkin reaps. I gain an Ember. I draw 8 cards. So now I'm holding 16 cards in my hand, plus whatever I started the turn with. And that means I'm playing these Logos actions, getting their Ember. They're going to the discard pile. Reap with the third Sutterkin. Gain an Ember. Draw 8 cards. I'm seeing these cards again. Might have the whole deck in my hands at this point. So then when I play these actions, they are the only cards in the discard pile. Reap with Sutterkin number 4, gain an Ember, pick up all those cards again, play all those cards again. The cycling and sequencing in KeyForge is very important, and rule of 6 is how it keeps things from getting out of balance and out of whack, meaning I could only play Cutthroat Research a total of 6 times. So I have 2 copies of them. So that means I could play each copy 3 times. I could play, if I'm just cycling 1 copy, yada, yada. But Professor Sutterkin can absolutely do that and break the game in a way that after this insane Logos turn, if I decide to go Sanctum, I have all 12 of these cards in my hand. If I decide to go Untame, I have all 12 of these cards in my hand. And that's what Logos does. Logos is so nuts. And that's where it's like Age of Ascension is slow, yes, but like if you get a deck with 4 Sutterkins and a way to keep them on the board, it's now one of just the coolest decks ever. Logos' shard is the Shard of Knowledge. Action, draw a card for each friendly shard. That's what Logos does. It's all about efficiency. It's all about looking through your deck and getting cards as quickly as you can. Time Traveler returns in this set as a special rare, meaning Time Traveler always shows up with Help from Future Self. Shout out to Help from Future Self, another fantastic KeyForge podcast. Go ahead and check it out. And now the last thing that I'm going to bring up is something that you're probably going to hear about Age of Ascension. It is a combo called Brig. So Brig is part of a 2-card combo of Binate Rupture and a card that was printed in Call of the Archons called Interdimensional Graft. Let's start with the BR part of it. Binate Rupture is an alpha Logos action. It says, play, each player gains Ember equal to the amount of Ember in their pool. Meaning, at the very start of my turn, let's say I have 5 Ember. Let's say my opponent has 4. I decide to play Binate Rupture. They go up to 8, I go up to 10. That's the first thing I did on my turn. That's pretty good, right? You're now in check and you have the rest of your turn to do whatever you want with it. But a lot of the times, if they have, 3 or more Ember, you're putting your opponent in check in a lot of cases. That's where Interdimensional Graft comes in. So this is an uncommon card printed in Call the Archons and Age of Ascension and Worlds Collide. Play, you get a Pip of Ember, and then if an opponent forges a key on their next turn, they must give you their remaining Ember. So let's go back to the scenario I just mentioned. I Binate Ruptured up to 10. My opponent Binate Ruptured up to 8. And key costs are 6. That means at the end of my turn, my opponent will start their turn, and they will forge a key at cost 6. Normally, that leftover 2 Ember would stay in their pool, but now with Interdimensional Graft, it comes to me. Pretty good. But it gets better if your opponent has more Ember, right? So if you are looking at Brig in your hand, and your opponent, let's say they already called check, and you can't really stop them. This isn't for their third key. Maybe you just double that Ember, and then you play Interdimensional Graft, and you get all of their leftovers. It's a really great way to swing the game back into your favor and to keep your opponent's momentum down. And it's a good way to punish a big burst. A lot of scaling Ember control happens with Brig. In Indianapolis at the national tournament, I was destroyed by a well-timed Brig, and I could not recover from it. And it definitely lost me the game. And that's just how it works. I knew the combo was in the deck, but I couldn't play around it, and it was my downfall. So very powerful combo, something fun to look for if you're opening mass Age of Ascension decks. You're looking for Brig, and then you're looking for this next combo. Mars. Mars doesn't necessarily fix anything that was the problem with Mars in the first set, but it just does all of those things a little harder and a little more aggressively. There's still a lot of stunning. There's still a lot of just rampant destruction. But the biggest thing that you're looking for in Mars is a new combo called Jenka. So we talked about key abduction in set 1. Return each Mars creature to its owner's hand. Then you may forge a key at +9 current cost, reduced by 1 for each card in your hand. So in a game where you craft your deck and construct it, you're wanting to see key abduction with logos, cards that let you archive a whole bunch of cards so that at the start of your turn you can pick them all up. It doesn't matter what they are. You play key abduction and you get to reduce that key cost. If you have 15 cards in your hand when you play key abduction, that key is free. So it doesn't matter what they are. So it's feasible to pull off key abduction as long as you have logos in the house, right? Or you could do it much faster with Martian Generosity. This is a rare action card in Age of Ascension. This is the combo that exists in the $3,600 KeyForge deck that was sold, and it's very potent. Multiple copies of Key Abduction can exist in the deck. So with Martian Generosity, if you burst up to a lot of Ember, play this card, lose all that Ember, but draw 2 cards for each Ember you lose, you might be looking at both of your Key Abductions and a fistful of cards that are going to make those keys cost 0. So that's the combo you're looking for. And honestly, like, some other highlights in here would be Nizic Resonator, an uncommon creature that just says, for each neighbor Nizic Resonator has, your opponent's keys cost +2. So more of that key cost increase. And the Shard of Hate, stun an enemy creature for each friendly shard. Stunning is good. This isn't the best card, but being able to stun up to 3 of your opponent's creatures is very, very good. One other comment I want to talk about is Xanthix Harvester. After Reap, you gain an additional Ember here. Xanthix Harvester cannot be used while it has a non-Mars neighbor, though. So it's still good, especially paired with cards like Crystal Hive. You can get a lot of Ember off of that card, but it's not always guaranteed that you'll be able to even use Xanthix Harvester, and he's not that big. But you pair him next to Ixal Dominator, who has Taunt, and suddenly you are reaping every turn with Xanthix Harvester for extra Ember, and that can be very good. So Mars, once again, is all about stunning and just disrupting the general game state, but it has the combo of Martian Generosity, Key Abduction, and that's just insane. Sanctum returns with more huge spirits, lots of armor, and very good capturing stuff. We see a return of Doorstep to Heaven, which is really good scaling Ember control. Each player with 6 or more loses all but 5, so it takes anybody off of check in most cases. But cards like Barrister Joya show up. And for the first time, we're seeing effects like this. Enemy creatures cannot reap. Just cannot. So a couple of the other cards we talked about before already, like Aember Imp and Bloodshard Imp, say you can still reap. You can still get that Ember off your creature, but something bad is going to happen. Barrister Joya just says, enemy creatures can't reap. I can reap all day, but you can't. And on a 5-power, 1 armor body, Barrister Joya is sticky. Sticks to the board, controls the board, oppresses the board. That's what Sanctum does. Abad the Grim is just better Charette. It's different than Charette in the way that it has 4 power, 1 armor. It still captures 3 on play, but it has an after reap ability that removes the Ember from Abad. So reap, discard 1 Ember from Abad the Grim, meaning that Ember just goes back to the pool. There's no chance for your opponent to get that Ember back. And I believe Abad is common rarity also. Yes. So you're looking for that card. It's good. Gatekeeper returns for scaling Ember control. Golden Aura. This is a very cool house cheating card. Play, choose a friendly creature. Fully heal that creature. And for the remainder of the turn, the chosen creature is considered to be in House Sanctum and cannot be dealt damage. So there's a lot going on here. First of all, you can fully heal any creature. So healing is good. Sanctum likes to heal across these first 2 sets, which isn't the most useful or powerful ability when board wipes exist at common rarity. But it's the rest of the effect that rules. Any creature now becomes Sanctum, meaning you can use it in any way that you want. It cannot be dealt damage, leaning into, obviously, you could fight with it, or you could just house cheat, pick anything, reap with it, like Tezmal. Turn Tezmal into a Sanctum, reap with it and tell your opponent what they can't play next turn. Sanctum's Shard is the Shard of Hope. Action, a friendly creature captures 1 Ember for each friendly shard. Pair that with cards like Borden the Redeemed, and you can capture a ton of your opponent's Ember on a turn and really make sure that they get out of check. And as Borden, this is an action, so you don't get an Ember for using this ability, but you take 2 away from your opponent for a short amount of time. Cards like Equalize are also introduced in this, which is really fun. Play, redistribute the Ember on friendly creatures among friendly creatures. Redistribute the Ember on enemy creatures among enemy creatures. So that means if your opponent has a really big creature with a ton of Ember on it that you're not going to be able to kill, or a little guy that's protected by a taunt that's holding a lot of Ember, or if your opponent has Abad the Grim that has 3 and the ability to discard that Ember, you're playing Equalize to move it to a softer target. Same with your own Ember. If one of your creatures is capturing too much Ember, like Borden the Redeemed, you can move it around to bigger targets, stickier targets. So being able to manipulate the Ember that's on the field feels very good. Another card I want to talk about real quick at Uncommon is Free Markets. This card gets better and better the more KeyForge sets that we see. It says play, gain 1 Ember to a maximum of 6 for each house represented among cards in play except for Sanctum. So this wasn't super powerful with only 2 sets and only 7 houses, but now with sets that don't even include Sanctum, Free Markets gets you a lot of Ember, typically. So that's a good one to see. Sanctum also has very special cards called the Ambassadors, and there's one for each of the other 6 houses. So let's just look at Logos Ambassador, because they all do the same thing except insert a different house here. They're 1-power elusive human creatures that say after fight, after reap, you may play or use a blank card this turn, depending on what house that ambassador is in. They will always show up with the other house. So like if you have a Mars ambassador, you have Mars in your deck also. They won't give you a Mars ambassador if you don't have Mars. There's just a lot of really good Sanctum in Age of Ascension. They're slow, but they slow down your opponent as well. Epic Quest returns, and night creatures return like Surmeros. This is a passive ability that says after your opponent gains Ember by reaping, Surmeros captures it. So there's a ton of reap control and board control in this set. Between Barrister Joy and Sir Marrows, your opponent's reaping might not be enough to win them the game because you're preventing it. The Grey Rider, last card I want to talk about. It's common rarity. It was printed in here for the first time. It has the deploy keyword. When I think of the deploy keyword, Grey Rider is the first card that comes to mind for me. So play after fight after reap. You may ready and fight with a neighboring creature. So the deploy keyword means you can pop it anywhere in the battle line, ready and fight with that creature. So it's like Gengar Chieftain, but you're not limited to just the left or right flank. Grey Rider is a very good card, and unlike Gengar Chieftain, you can do that more than once in Grey Rider's lifespan, so on the board. But it is just a 2-power creature, so you got to keep Grey Rider alive. Moving right along, Shadows comes back in and steals just like they did in Call of the Archons. Just a little more nuanced and honestly just as good because of this guy right here. Ronnie Wrist Clocks. This is the only card I'm going to talk about in Age of Ascension Shadows, honestly. Because Shadows is what it is, you know? After just watching the first video about Call of the Archons, you're going to get a good idea. They steal. They swing the board. They swing the Ember, the state of the Ember in the whole game. And Ronnie Wrist Clocks does it really, really well. Play, steal one. Straight up. Can't really do anything about that. You just drop Ronnie, you steal one. If your opponent has 7 or more Ember, you steal 2 instead. That's a 4 Ember swing. Pair that with cards that return from the last set, like Too Much to Protect, where in Call of the Archons, Too Much to Protect just brought your opponent down to 6. Obviously, Shadows has ways to get them off of check after that. Ronnie is a good way to do that. But if your opponent's at 7 and you have Too Much to Protect and Ronnie, you're just playing Ronnie and you're saving Too Much to Protect. Shard of Greed. Action, gain 1 Ember for each friendly shard. I think this was made like this because if it was steal 1 for each friendly shard, that would be broken. But just gaining Ember, straight up, Shard of Greed, that's a good shard. Probably the best one. Another fan favorite that was introduced in the set is Bren the Fanatic. 3 power with skirmish, meaning you can't bomb him by fighting. Play, your opponent gains an Ember. Destroyed, steal 3. That's good. So you want to see Bren in decks like with Dis. Or you could put Bone Rot Venom on Bren, so after you use it 2 times, it blows up. The only thing you have to worry about is your Bren getting bounced. So we didn't talk about this card in the first set, but this is one of my favorite Shadows actions. Lights Out, you get an Ember for playing it, and you return 2 enemy creatures to their owner's hand. Again, if you bounce a creature, if they had Ember on it, you get that Ember. I think that's it for Shadows. They steal. They steal really well. They also have a couple of alpha cards in here, but they're not that bad. Like Sucker Punch feels well designed. It says alpha. You can only play this card before doing anything else this step. Deal 2 damage to an enemy creature. If that creature is destroyed by this effect, archive Sucker Punch. So, depending on what your opponent's playing, well-placed Sucker Punches are going to loop and get you Ember every time you play them. And you might be able to whittle down some good targets because 2 power in this game is assigned to a lot of very powerful cards. Like Scowly Caper, like Umbra, and any of the Disimps that we've talked about so far. So if you're opening Shadows, expect to steal. Final house. Oh man, we're about at another hour. Untamed. It's still good. It's still not broken. Untamed is still very bursty in this set. It was tuned a little bit back. There's no Hunting Witch. There's no Witch of the Eye. Right? Yeah. But the new Witch is Dusk Witch. Also, Untamed has a lot of Alpha and Omega. Not all of them are good. So we'll go over some of those. Dusk Witch, though, is very, very fun. Dusk Witch is a 1-power human witch creature. Omega after you play this card and this step. So it's the last card you can play. Dusk Witch is elusive, so it's a little harder to kill, but with only 1 health, like any ping damage is going to kill it. But if your opponent doesn't have an answer for Dusk Witch, especially on the first turn, Dusk Witch says your creatures enter play ready. So if Dusk Witch is on the field, you're bringing in untamed creatures the next turn, or anything, and you can use them immediately. It's very good. Let's look at some not good alpha and omega effects. Bumblebird. Alpha, give 2+1 power counters to each other friendly untamed creature. 1 power. There's no reason for Bumblebird to have alpha. There really isn't. Giving 2+1 power counters to all of your untamed creatures is good, but not good enough to warrant that, like, you can't play a couple first and then play Bumblebird. Personally, that's what I think. Glimmer's a good alpha. This card makes sense. It's recursion. Recursion is powerful. Glimmer says, alpha, you can only play this card before doing anything else this step. Play, return a card from your discard pile to your hand. So you could be playing into Untamed, and you played something really good in Untamed on your last turn. You drop down Glimmer, you pick it up, you do it again. Cards like Flaxia gain 2 if you control more creatures than your opponent. If your opponent killed that thing, you can Glimmer it back into your hand. Fuzzy Gruin, same thing. But what I like to do with Glimmer is pair it with Nature's Call. Nature's Call is an uncommon action. You get a Pip of Ember for playing it. Play, return up to 3 creatures to their owner's hand. So the way you can loop this is you play Glimmer, you pick up your Nature's Call, you play Nature's Call, you put Glimmer back into your hand and pop 2 of your opponent's creatures back to their hands. Then, next turn, you play Glimmer, you pick up Nature's Call again, you do the same thing. So you're slowing down your opponent while also recycling this Ember Pip over and over. If you have Flaxia, you can also loop that into the combo, get some good Ember off of dropping Flaxia a couple times in a turn. Full Moon also rewards you with that. So Untamed is I think I like Untamed the most, or not the most, but so much because they play like deck builders. I'm a big fan of Ascension, the deck building game, Slay the Spire, stuff like that. Untamed feels like you find these combos that just break and they go off and they burst and they help you progress your win condition. And you pair it with cards like KeyCharge. There's just a lot you can do in Untamed as far as the combos are concerned. And so if you're a combo-y kind of player and you like speed, Untamed is still the best house for you in Age of Ascension. Another card, this is Gravid Cycle. It does the same thing, but at the end of your turn, play, return a card from your discard pile to your hand. So there's a lot of weird things you can do with the Alpha and Omegas that are printed in Untamed. And real quick, just to clarify, if you have 2 cards in your hand that you could legally play as alphas, if you play one, you can no longer play the other. So that's another thing that kind of got frustrating about this set is you would have 2 copies of Sucker Punch in your hand and you want to call Shadows. You can only play 1 Sucker Punch. You have to either hold on to the other one or just discard it. And that always feels bad. Yeah, there's the key cheat still. Chota, KeyCharge, some big creatures, good recursion. This card's good. Punctuated Equilibrium is a rare. It says play. Each player discards their hand, then refills their hand as if it were their draw card step. Meaning, you could play a whole bunch of Untamed creatures out, play Punctuated Equilibrium, pick up a brand new hand. You disrupted what your opponent was going to do on their next turn, and you can drop more Untamed creatures. Shard of Life. Shuffle a card from your discard pile into your deck for each friendly shard. So their shard is about recursion, which makes sense. Cards like Regrowth let you do the same thing. Return a creature from your discard pile to your hand. So you get a pip for it. You can play it anytime, but it is restricted to just a creature. Nepenthe Seed, though. Omni, sacrifice it. Return any card from your discard pile to your hand. So Untamed, speed, recursion, combos, deck building. That's the TLDR for that house. And that does it. That covers Age of Ascension. So again, if you want the full card list for this set to see what you could potentially find in your decks, go to archonarcana.com. Check out the card gallery. Filter it by set, by house, however you want to do it. I barely scratched the surface on some of what you can find in Age of Ascension. It's a very fun set, and I feel like it has aged like fine wine. Again, a lot of the hardcore players are probably going to tell you that they love this set or hate it. It is still debated, but I would like to reiterate that it is the easiest one to get and the cheapest. So if you're still kind of on the fence about KeyForge, if you've been watching these videos or watching other people's videos or listening to podcasts, looking at the art, anything, and you're even a little bit interested, I encourage you to just spend the $10, $20 on a display. That's 12 decks. Get a buddy and jam some Age of Ascension against each other. And I really think you'll become a fan. It's just a really fun way to play KeyForge. And you never know, you might find the next $3,600 deck out of Age of Ascension. That's going to do it for this video. That is a look at Age of Ascension. In the next one, we'll look at Worlds Collide, which is, to this day, one of my favorite sets. Probably top 2, easily top 3. And it's the first time that we see new houses come in and houses rotate out, which completely changed the game of KeyForge. Also, the 2 houses introduced in Worlds Collide were so overtuned that you wanted them a lot. There's a lot of really good cards on the Worlds Collide card list. So I'm excited to talk about that one. Thank you for watching. If you made it all the way to the end here, I appreciate it. Check out the links in the description to join the Absolute BSS Discord, where we also have a text channel for KeyForge. Shout out to Type for getting an Age of Ascension 2-player starter. I got one. I got someone. So hopefully we get some more KeyForge players joining us in the Crucible. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me there in the comments here, wherever you know to find me. And I'll answer any questions that you may have, look at your deck list, kind of give you a good idea where to start. And I'd love to play some games with you. We can either play on Tabletop Simulator or on the Crucible, which I'll do a whole video on just the Crucible by itself probably. And yeah, it's awesome. It's a great game. I love it. I can't get enough of it. Set 8 is currently being funded. If you're watching this at the time of release, October 16th. It is fully funded. They've made $250,000. Let me just bring it up real quick, actually. So the next set of KeyForge coming out introduces a new house. It's got a wacky, wild lineup. It has reached $250,000, over 1,000 backers, 2 weeks left on this pledge. So if you want to get into the game, I think this is going to be a good set to do it. I'll do a video on what we've seen of this set so far, but it looks very similar to sets like Call the Archons and Worlds Collide that aren't too chunky and just kind of play, and they do really well. So if you're interested, check it out on GameFound. Ghost Galaxy Games is who currently owns KeyForge, who is currently crowdfunding this new release, and this should ship in early 2024. So until next time, thank you for joining us. Thank you for checking out these KeyForge videos, especially if you come from Battle Spirit Saga. I appreciate it. And we'll be back with more KeyForge content soon. So long.